France's Yellow Vest movement. Why are the French protesting? A reference list is provided at the end of this video. Here we're finding possible reasons why the Yellow Vests protest. In France, the Yellow Vest movement have been protesting since November of 2018, until now early April 2019, so it's been about 5 months in total, and it doesn't seem to stop soon. The Yellow Vest movement has been labeled in most news report as a protest of the people, which means that there's no people in power behind it. Considering about protests, some may ask, why do people protest? According to Article 19, an organization promoting the freedom to speak and the freedom to know, to protest, is to protect human rights, civic space, citizenry, and democracy. Through protests, marginalized people can express out loud their sufferings that result from government's policies, so that the authorities take responsibilities for their own actions. Likewise, many may ask, why do the French protest so often? In this video, we'll look into the incidents of the Yellow Vest protest, followed by an analysis of the latest electoral participation in France, and economic crisis in Europe. The Yellow Vest movement started with the protest against the government's plan to raise fuel tax, that resulted in 20% rising fuel price compared to the price at the start of 2018. However, there have been many underlying causes of people's rage prior to this outburst, including the cut of exit tax that the protesters believed to be in favor of the rich. Law about the exit tax was written during Nicolas Sarkozy's presidency with the purpose to prevent rich entrepreneurs to temporarily change their tax domicile to avoid paying tax. Macron intended to attract investors with the reduction of exit tax, and the demonstrators consider this an action to please the rich. At the same time, when the president's promise to deal with climate change turned out to be the raise of fuel tax, it's become difficult for those who cannot afford either fuel and new electric cars. Although French government encourages people to scrap their polluted vehicles with up to €2,500 as an incentive, one of the cheapest EVs costs around €4,000 to €4,500 in France. Seeing that the median monthly income is around €1,700, which means that half of the citizens earned less than that, and the gap of at least €1,500 for an EV thereby can be huge for many families. Apart from this, the current President Emmanuel Macron's contemptuous attitude toward the poor has been widely discussed by the public. For instance, in 2017 he talked about two types of people we can see in train stations. One is people who succeed, and the other is people who are nothing. Let's hear his voice.
C'est un lieu où on croise les gens qui réussissent et les gens qui ne sont rien.
On top of that, according to his speech on August 24, 2017, the president also said that France was not reformable because the French hate change.
Les Françaises et les Français détestent les réformes.
As Macron seems to favor the 1% of the population and couldn't care less about the middle class and the working class, it seems like the protesters demand not for simply more money in their pockets, but for class-based equality. In this section, On the Street, we'll look at the timeline of the protest. On November 17, 2018, nearly 290,000 people joined the first major blockades on the streets in many places around the country. 1 week later, on November 24, the number of the protesters decreased but was still as high as 166,000. Those in Paris clashed with the police with tear gas and water cannon on the Champs-Élysées Boulevard. 3 days later, on November 28, the president announced that he would not change the plan to raise fuel tax, and this decision led to another big demonstration on December 1, with about 136,000 protesters on the streets blocking shopping centers and gas stations. On December 4, the government suspended their fuel tax raise for 6 months before announced cancellation of the plan on the following day, although the problematic decrease of exit tax was considered necessary, and its concession would be a regression that shouldn't happen. Consequently, the protest became more violent with more police clashes and cars getting burned. As a result, important places had to be closed including Louvre and the Eiffel Tower. On December 10, the president addressed the crisis on television and promises measures to solve the financial crisis, which were to raise the minimum wage by €100 per month, and to collect no tax from overtime earning. As a consequence, the number of the protesters dropped to 66,500 on December 15. And after the French Senate approved the measures on December 21, The total number of the yellow vests was reported to be 38,600 across the country. However, violence persisted. Some were detained and taken into custody. The number kept dropping until 5 January 2019 when the reported number of the protesters increased to 50,000 due to former clashes with the police. And on the following day, a group of women marched on the street with the purpose to establish a peaceful image of the movement and also kneeled down to express their condolences for those who were killed during the protest. In the following week, the numbers again increased to 84,000 on 12 January before decreased to 46,600 on 23 February when he attended a Paris annual farm show, although he still had to deal with people's rage. Some news agencies report that the president has treated the protesters more nicely as he is running a campaign for the upcoming European Parliament elections in May. His method seems to work, seeing that less protesters were on the street at the end of March with 33,400 in number. The overall picture appears that the numbers have been going up and down according to the government's reactions. Now let's hear what happens on social media. Aside from the fact that the street protests began from social media with this guy Ghislaine Coudert introducing the idea of wearing the yellow vest for the protest. Aside from that, there's a song called Gilets jaunes by Cop Johnson. The music video reached over 22 million views and 32,000 comments within just 4 months. It also caught attention from well-known news agencies like Le Huffington Post and Le Parisien. The song's available on online music platforms as well, like Apple Music and Spotify. Let's listen to part of the song.
Macron, démission, Macron, démission, Macron, démission, Macron, démission, j'ai dit Macron, démission.
The lyrics begins with Macron démission, asking for Macron's resignation, and continues on high fuel prices that keep rising despite the fact that he paid all the taxes.
J'ai voulu mettre l'essence, c'est trop cher. J'ai payé les taxes, c'est trop cher. J'ai voulu mettre l'essence, c'est trop cher. J'ai payé les taxes, c'est trop cher.
The song also encourages people to join the Yellow Vest movement. In addition, there's an anonymous post online listing 8 complaints from the movement. It's been shared quite widely online and on the street among the protesters. The list asks for an establishment of a temporary government with no intervention by the traditional parties, lower taxes on the poor and the middle class, higher taxes on the rich, limitation of immigrants by not joining the Global Compact for Migration Agreement, local democracy, no more support for the capitalist agriculture company Bayer Monsanto, a company that is well known to take advantages of the agriculturalists, re-establishment of trade protections specifically against German imports, a cancellation of all states' financial support for the medias, and a limitation of European integration which hurts the working class. Apparently, social media can help people understand purposes of the movement more because the protesters have more space to express their needs and put them into words, and it's easier for the audience too to understand what they are saying. In this section, from the protesters' voices, we'll look at 2 interviews with the protesters. One is the interview with the regular protester Valerie Casanova by BBC News. From the video, the protester told the news reporter that nobody asks which way they lean politically, which implies the detachment of political opinions in this movement. She drove the reporter to her house in a northern France area called Beauvais, and explained how she had no choice but to drive a car because places in the countryside are so far away from one another. She said that her family had started to struggle financially, no longer go out, and becoming the working class, as the middle class is gone. Another interview is the interview with the protester Ghislaine Coudert by DW Academy, published on December 8, 2018. The interviewer asked him questions to get some insights of the Yellow Vest movement. According to his response, the cancellation of the fuel tax is not enough because the economic crisis has made the working class and the middle class struggled for years. He also revealed that he was not political at all, and he wanted the rights to vote for each law before the parliament to pass it, because voting for president every 5 years appeared ineffective for him in terms of political participation. As to answer the question if he went against Macron's clean energy plan, he said that he definitely wanted to live in unpolluted air, yet he was struggling to afford his daily activities already, not to mention a new electric car or even a hybrid one. Basically, the demonstrators talked about their lower quality of life due to the accumulated impacts from France's economic problem and their frustration against the President Macron, who marginalizes those from the working class and the middle class, while the gap between the rich and the poor keeps growing wider. Now let's hear from the President Emmanuel Macron. At the end of 2018, the president mentioned the social outburst as a part of his New Year speech at the Élysée Palace. According to his address, his plans will keep going forward without compromise, and citizens should accept reality and focus on the good part of infrastructures of France. As another response to the Yellow Vest protest, the president promised to arrange a grand national debate, which started on 15 January 2019, in Normandy, where he addressed that he wanted to empower those in economic difficulty. Yet there were those who do the right thing and those who were screwing around. This caused a huge flood of public criticisms toward the president's attitude, which has long been believed to be arrogant, aloof, and disdainful. Furthermore, there's also a website called
Le Grand Débat National
for this occasion. The website's created as a consultation online for people to send in their thoughts and opinions on the questions arranged by the government. The online participation was planned to open from 18 January to March 18, and the responses from citizens are to be sent to the government, before its synthesis is to be published during April, and action upon the final analyses of the consultation is to be started by the end of April. However, there have also been aloof responses throughout the protest period, such as when he said, "That's how I am, and I'm not going to change," as a response to a mayor who asked if he regretted saying that unemployed people could easily find a job. The Yellow Vest movement has been a huge issue that's analyzed widely by journalists and critiques. So, we'll find out their arguments about the root of this protest. Johnston concluded the main point of the Yellow Vest movement concisely as, "We can't make ends meet. The cost of living keeps going up, and our incomes keep going down. We just can't take it anymore. The government must stop, think, and change course." This argument goes in accordance with the protester
Jean-Marc Mouret
statement to Le Monde.
Les élites parlent de fin du monde, quand nous, on parle de fin du mois.
The elites talk about the end of the world while we talk about the end of the month. Many have brought up the idea of French protest spirit that also shows as the Yellow Vest movement proceeds. French bottom-up protests and revolutions have been well known and interested by many, because such defense of their rights can be considered one of the reasons why French workers receive protections and benefits in their employment, more than those of many other countries. Moreover, in the article called
La philosophie syndicaliste et le mythe de la grève générale,
written in 1913, the author mentioned
La psychologie révolutionnaire,
or the revolution mentality as one reason behind French protests, especially those of the working class. However, having the protest spirit doesn't necessarily cause a protest, unless there are other practical reasons that urge the people to stand up and protect their rights. So, we'll look into the recent president election and the impacts from European economic crisis in France, both of which have been mentioned throughout the duration of the movement. In the recent president election, Macron won, but he wasn't the first choice of many French people. According to the official result in 2017, although Macron got most of the votes, abstention was at 25.38%, which counted as 12 million voters, 3 million more than the previous election back in 2012, and 4 million citizens cast blank votes. In the first round election, Macron gained only 24% of the votes, yet in the second round he gained more votes from eliminated candidates. However, before and during the Yellow Vest protest, Macron's unpopularity has been going up, presumably because he failed to make a practical and affordable changes for the majority of citizens. While he pleases the rich, his policies have worsened the quality of life of the working class and the middle class. Another possible root of the problem is economic crisis in Europe. In the book Citizen and the Crisis, the authors state that France's economic crisis has led the contentious French into post-contentious era, where the citizens consider other forms of political participation other than electoral voting, such as to sign a petition, to boycott a product, and to join a strike. It has been a decade that Europe has been struggling with economic crisis since the debt crisis hit the European countries in 2008 to 2009. In 2016, economists, the OECD, and the European Commission suggested that the main problem of France's economy lies in the labor market, which inferred to persistent unemployment issue. Some economists also argued that it was because of France's monetary union with Germany, which was stronger and made France lose control over economic adjustment. In Macron's presidency, although France's economy looks better in diagrams with more long-term labor contracts, and higher soft power implying France's higher appeal in international market, Some economists believed that part of these outcomes are the consequences of the overall growing economic strength in Europe, as well as the policies of the former President François Hollande, seeing that the numbers were rising before Macron took his president position. Moreover, while the economy boost appears progressive, unemployment rates are still as high as 9%, which you can see is pretty high compared to the trend of other countries. 1.8% economic growth is still considered slow. Tax cut for the rich sums up to 3.2 billion euros per year, and purchasing power remains stagnant and even decreases for the lowest 5% of French population. Although France's GDP strives higher, average French people's disposable income increases only a little, and it shows that the economic reboot has positive impact mainly on the rich, who enjoy lower wealth tax and exit tax. So to conclude, the Yellow Vest movement indeed fights against social misery. The protesters all unite out of financial difficulties without any political figure organizing the movement. One of the major factors of this problem seems to be the debt crisis that hit Europe about a decade ago. Plus, as the President Emmanuel Macron expresses his disdainful attitude toward the working class and marginalize them, the public also goes against his presidency. In Social Movements and Democracy in the 21st Century, the author suggests that in order to solve economic problems, the government and the people may have to come up with new visions that are inclusive enough to consider people from all classes. Here are all the references. Thank you for watching, and if there's any mistake please feel free to correct me in the comment section below.